to say good morning. I'm William Harris. I'm so delighted to be your MC this morning. We're going to begin by welcoming the Brace Brigade, who are men who are representative of the 54th Regiment and other African American regiments during the Civil War. So let's welcome the Brace Brigade.
Music has been a very important part of my ancestors' survival. They use music. And so I often think about when someone is in trouble, especially where I'm from in Georgia, it's what would be the song? Someone is about to be lynched. What would be the song that they might sing? I think I use a song I hear my mother would sing early in the morning to try to deal with the trials that she and my father faced. And it's a song I sing now because my race is still facing trials. I want Jesus to walk with me. I want Jesus to walk with me all along this tedious journey. I want Jesus to walk with me, walk with my ancestors. Please walk with me. Walk with my ancestors. Please walk with me, oh Lord, all along this tedious journey. I want Jesus to walk with me, walk with my mother. Please walk with me. Walk with my mother. Please walk with me. Oh Lord, all along this tedious journey. I want Jesus to walk with me. Walk with my Father. Please walk with me. Walk with my Father. Please walk with me. Oh Lord, all along this tedious journey. I want Jesus to walk with me.
That was beautiful. This is Dr. Shirley Jackson Whitaker, the multi-talented Dr. Whitaker, who also is an incredible artist, and you're going to have an opportunity today to see some of her incredible work at the Amherst Historical Society. So again, thank you, Dr. Whitaker. Let's give you another round of applause. Again, my name is William T. Harris, or William Thayer Harris, and I'm delighted to serve as your MC today. I'm actually honored to welcome you to the second Amherst, Massachusetts Juneteenth commemorative celebration. As the Civil War raged, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, proclaiming all slaves in the rebellious states were freed. The following month, it was the establishment of the 54th Regiment, the first African-American regiment to serve in the Civil War. And that was really a momentous moment. And after that, the 5th Cavalry, and then ultimately the 55th Regiment. And one of my ancestors, Christopher Thompson, my third tape great-grandfather, who's actually interred here, along with his son Charles and three of his brothers, James, Henry, and John, all enlisted in the course of that year. James actually joined right away, the beginning of March of 1863, and was actually part of the famed Fort Wagner assault that was portrayed in the movie Glory. James survived. He was one of the few that actually survived that battle. And he was in hand-to-hand combat and was bayoneted, but he was able to serve through the end of the Civil War and returned here to Amherst, where he lived out the rest of his life. There are many of us here today who are descendants of those brave men who served in the Civil War and supported the Union. I really want to take a moment. I have my mother Edith Harris here, my nephew Michael, my cousin Ellie, cousin Noli, of course Debbie and Nikki, and many others of our family. So I'd like you all who are descendants of Civil War veterans to please raise your hand so we can acknowledge you, all the descendants. I think it's really important to acknowledge that those men, particularly the African American men in Massachusetts at that time, were free. And they joined the Civil War because they had a vision and a hope that America would provide their descendants, and them as well, with greater liberties and equalities. And so we're all here today as beneficiaries of those sacrifices that they made. And so the celebration today is meant to, of course, commemorate that time, the sacrifices people made, but also to remind us its relevance today, that their work is not done, that we have to continue it. I want to take a moment to also acknowledge that many of you may have seen last year the commemorative plaques, the granite plaques that were made, and they were commissioned by the Guardians of the American Republic in 1896. And they represent all the men from Massachusetts region who fought in the Civil War, including the 54th Regiment, 55th, and 5th Cavalry. And they're absolutely magnificent. And so those are going to be put in the future on permanent display here in Amherst. But they're so special. They're very rare and fragile. And it was really through the efforts of this community, and in particular, my late Uncle Dudley, who is the mother of Deborah Bridges and grandfather of Anika Lopes, who really started that effort for the restoration of those plaques. And his vision, and so I really wanted to invoke his name today because he's really here with us in spirit, because he really gave us a lot of momentum to start this work, along with my late brother, Daniel Harris. And my sister and I are carrying on that work to document our family history. So we are so excited that this history really lives with us today. And so my cousin Anika Lopes, who's also a city council member here, has taken on a new initiative, and I want her to come to the podium and speak a few moments and announce this new initiative that really builds on the past and brings it into the future to help building the greatness of Amherst in our community. Anika.
Thank you. So our ancestors were driven and hopeful to better their lives and ensure better lives for their descendants. They held this belief in the face of life-threatening factors and circumstances. Juneteenth is one of the ways we honor their sacrifices, which has enabled us to enjoy quality lives. In this spirit, I am thrilled to announce the establishment of Ancestral Bridges. Our purpose is to carry forward this commitment to address the most pressing needs of our beloved Amherst community. I'd like to recognize our founding board members, co-founder Cinda Jones, Mila Sherman, William Harris, Dr. Shirley Jackson Whitaker, Dr. Kamal Ali, Sutrita Sintron, Talib Sadiq, Gabriel T., Michael Pill, and our advisory board, Stan Rosenberg, Dr. Donald Brown, and Ann Tweedy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to invite to the podium State Representative Mindy Dom, who is going to make a presentation.
Good morning, everybody. First, friends and neighbors, can we please have a round of applause for Anika and Deborah? met Anika, which was a couple of years ago, I think, on Carly's porch, when Senator Comerford and I were honoring Carly. Anika came over and said, "Do you know what's going on with the Civil War tablets?" And I said, "I don't, but what should I know?" And she immediately gave me some tasks to do or to consider. And she obviously took on a great deal. And today we have this amazing exhibit at the Bangs Community Center that really connects us to our past in a way that we otherwise would not have been. So thank you so much. And if you haven't gone to see the tablets and the incredible exhibit, I strongly encourage you to do so. Spend hours there. You've got a great tour guide, Deborah. She'll point out things that you would otherwise have missed. And I was thinking about this today. Do you mind if I put this in? Because I was thinking about taking words into action. And that, for me, a large part of what Juneteenth is taking the words of freedom and making sure that they were lived in action. And the role that the cavalry and the regiment played in making sure that enslaved black people in Texas knew that there was freedom. And though no one was talking about it, it was still theirs to claim. It was still theirs to do it. And that those folks took action to make those words come alive. And that's what we're doing today. But I also want to say that's what Anika does with and Deborah, with the tablets and today's walking tour and with this new foundation. I mean, think about it. This was an idea, I think, that Anika had to try to connect historic places for this weekend. And here we are, enjoying those benefits. So thank you so much. Really cannot thank you enough. I don't want to embarrass her too much, so I'm going to stop with that and just say that I missed last year's Juneteenth celebration because I was out of town. And so I missed the opportunity to share the first annual observance of a state holiday with all of you. And I am so grateful to be able to be here today and to be with the person who sort of prodded the House of Representatives to take action. And Professor Shabazz, and also to just give it up to the state legislature for moving quickly on something, which you could argue wasn't really quickly because Juneteenth happened a century ago. But for the legislature, we acted quick. So, Anika, could you come up here because I do have a resolution to provide you. Thank you. And this is on behalf of myself and Senator Comerford, who I think is meeting us later at the meeting. So, thank you. Be it hereby known to all that the Massachusetts House of Representatives offers its sincerest congratulations to members of the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment and the 5th Cavalry. Okay, so maybe we're not so fast. In recognition of their efforts to travel to Texas from Amherst and bridge our town with the military acts that ended slavery in the United States of America on June 19, 1865. And we've named the people. May I read these names? And I want to just say thank you for providing this information to us in terms of those who died in service, the Sacred Dead, Jason Chaplin, Jarvis Jackson, Sanford Jackson, Henry Thompson, and John Thompson, and those that braved death, Samuel Burke, Charles Finnemore, Samuel Freeman, Windsor Jackson, Francis Jennings, William Jennings, Howard Paxson, Joseph Solomon, Lorenzo Suglund, Alexander Taylor, James Thompson, Christopher Thompson, Charles Thompson, Charles Waters, and William Williamson. It's with great pride that we remember their service and their contributions that make Amherst an important place in the story of Juneteenth. We recognize their incredible bravery and dedication to deliver and enforce the Proclamation of Freedom in General Order Number 3 while wearing lesser-made uniforms and carrying second-hand armament throughout lawless territories. What risk they took. Thank you.
Beautifully said. And I think it's important to acknowledge that at the time the 54th Regiment was established, there were about 100 African Americans living in Amherst, so it was nearly a quarter of the population. that joined the regiment. That's how strongly they felt about the cause and the Union and being able to defend everyone's rights and liberties. So it's very poignant, and thank you for those wonderful words in that proclamation. I'd now like to invite to the podium my cousin, Dr. Kamala Lee, to share a few words.
The A-team is here. The A-team is back from last year, and I mean that sincerely. Without us, the country is in real trouble. I'd like this. Oh, okay. I'm a former singer, so I could follow Dr. Whitaker. This is a day of commemoration, celebration, and struggle. To remind us that the role of the black veteran, which has been consistent over time from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War to World War I and II, and the struggles of that operation in Vietnam, which claimed more black lives than all of these wars I just mentioned put together, we should understand that struggle is inevitable in a country which is as divided as we are today. Struggle in the eyes of those of us who have been at this for some time is about keeping our eyes on the prize. The prize is freedom. The prize is an equitable system of economics, politics, family relations. The prize should be taken seriously and should be pursued by any means necessary. I use that phraseology with respect to one of the American heroes of our time, Haj Malik Shabazz, who remained known as Malcolm X. By any means necessary does not necessarily mean the kind of violence that some associated with that particular gentleman. His genius was that he was able to take very complicated ideas and present them in a way that was scrutable to the common reader. So that the struggle that he talked about, we can break down into three different areas. The struggle that takes place when you hold something in your hand or hold someone in your hand or hold an issue with your hands and you physically try to deal with it. And then there's the struggle where you speak out against it, which is the kind of struggle we're involved with right now, here in this place. And the last ideal struggle is that you protest it deeply in your hearts. And the issue of hearts is critical. It's your hearts that bring you here today, that brought some of you here last year, and will bring you here again next year, and in between. The struggle is never ending. I mentioned the Civil War, and I mentioned the Revolutionary War. I'm interested, I think you may be too, in what happened to those veterans when they came back from the war. Understandable that in the Revolutionary War, that those 7 individuals who have been mentioned as heroes who were African American found it difficult to pursue their lives. We know that veterans returning from the Civil War were met with the repositioning and reintroduction of slavery through Jim Crow laws, through laws that forbade black people the rights to vote. We know that in the end of the First World War, in 1819, blacks endured the Red Zone. A series of violent massacres took place, culminating with one that we all know about, I'm sure by now, in 1821 in Tulsa. There were more than 50 such incidents of black veterans who became the vanguard of the pushback against racism, who fought in places in Europe against fascism, only to come home and find that they had to fight that same fight in their home country. So I think that, again, when we think about this idea of commemorating and celebrating and the joyful aspect of having the opportunity, the blessing, to look back at the ancestral bridges that link these ideas, these epics, these situations, these wars, these attempts at peace. the attempts of black people, and not black people alone, black people and their white and brown allies, who over time have shared the same dream of freedom, of power with a heart, not the power of the Klan, the bastardization of the heart, the bastardization and the perversion of love, but rather the genuine love that I felt here last year and I feel here today. It's palpable, it's visible, it's critical. The American ship of state has been floating on very troubled waters from its inception. This experiment in democracy is floating along with it. And we have maniacs trying to punch holes in the floor of that ship to send us all down, even though they know and should know that that is just another perverted form of suicide. You are the 18. Look at us. Black, white, brown, Native American, comprising generations of struggle. Struggle that continues because the struggle has not been responded to in any meaningful way. The schools in this country are more segregated than they were in 1950, before Brown versus the Board of Education. The economic situation we find ourselves in, where I struggle to ask my students, do you know why Long Meadow looks like Long Meadow and Springfield in the North End and the Hill looks like it looks? Do you think that that's an accident? Do you think that it's normal, that it's regular, that it should be tolerated? Or do you want to understand and try to figure out how it got to be that way and to correct it? Oppression is taught. We don't come into this world hating anyone. We come into this world with innocence. We're very carefully taught over a period of years how to hate one another. And that hatred is not by accident. It supports the very few minority of extraordinarily wealthy, powerful people who reign over us because we've allowed it. We need to be very clear on what being here today, the message that is inferred by our standing and my standing next to the grave of a relative who fought in the Civil War. The trauma of being black in America doesn't go away. Professor or not, it doesn't go away. The trauma of being a victim of white supremacy. And that victimization goes both ways. Both the one who practices it and the one on the receiving end. We're all sick because we can't learn how to love each other. And how to love each other, praxis. By doing. Love is not a noun. Love is a verb. It's something that one does. It's something that one pursues. It's something that one persists and insists on. So, in closing, because I'm touching the surface of some very important personal feelings. My daughter told me yesterday, we had lunch at my granddaughter's 6th grade graduation. And I thought she was graduating from Harvard. Bless her heart. I don't know if Milla's here yet. That's my 14 grandkids. 1 great-granddaughter. My daughter was saying, Abi, the November elections are critical for this country. I know that. I was very glad to hear my daughter remind me. We've got work to do. You are the 18th. But as we pursue the curricula of ancestral bridges, I'm hoping and praying that I'll see a lot more actions aimed at tearing down the destructive elements of our society which we all recognize and building them up on the basis of principles of hope, of love, equitability, and power to the people. Thank you.
Great, thank you for those moving remarks. And I think that message is so important, that we are looking at moving forward and how we move together in love and in community. And that's really what today is about. As we commemorate this day and build the Juneteenth activities, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge a number of people who helped make this possible. The celebration and our coming together today, including Senator Joe Comerford, Mindy Dobb, former Senator Stan Rosenberg, former State Representative Jim Collins, Amherst Town Manager Paul Buckelman, members of the Amherst Town Council, and tomorrow we're going to hear a special remarks sent by Senator Ed Markey. They all are very key in helping advance passage of Juneteenth as a state holiday. I also want to thank many of the sponsors that helped today happen: Town of Amherst, Crest Program, People's Bank, University of Massachusetts Amherst, again, State Representative Mindy Dobb, the African American Reparations Assembly of Amherst. And I also want to extend special thanks to Jennifer Moyston, Ann Tweedy and the Amherst Historical Society, the Emily Dickinson Museum, Hope Church, Goodwin Church, and the Drake. As you heard, an idea that came out of last year was creating a history walk for Amherst. And today we're going to inaugurate a portion of that, and we invite you to participate in it. I also want to give a special shout out to my cousin Deborah Bridges, who curated a special exhibit at the Amherst Historical Society. That you're going to kind of see the progression of African American families here in Amherst. And it's really moving to walk through that and see some of our ancestors who contributed to the fabric of Amherst. All of you are part of the Amherst community and are going to contribute how this city and this community moves forward. So we hope you're inspired by these experiences. We're really honored today. Oh, I left out 3 other people really important for me to acknowledge: Captain Gabriel Ting, Barry Roberts with the horses here on the back. You have a number of volunteers, Steve with the Veterans Affairs. Thank you all so much for helping make the celebration possible. We're going to begin in just a moment a procession. We're going to be following the horse and carriages here in the back. We do have a van for people who are comfortable walking. But we're going to be going from here to the Amherst Historical Society.
We are so glad to see you. My name's Brooke Steinhauser. I'm the program director at the Emily Dickinson Museum here. I know a lot of you are probably wondering, why are we not inside the house today? I so wish that you could be. We have been closed for the last 2.5 years here at the museum. We are in that time have undertaken a pretty serious restoration of the inside of the homestead here where Emily Dickinson was born and died and did most of her writing. So that restoration is nearly complete. We're going to be announcing our reopening this summer very soon. If you want to be the first to know, when you can come and reserve yourself a ticket, I would encourage you to join our mailing list. You can go to emilydickinsonmuseum.org and just sign up, and you'll be among the first to know, and we look forward to welcoming you inside as soon as we can. So for today, thank you for gathering here for this amazing program under this witness tree that was here in Emily Dickinson's lifetime. I'd like to thank the organizers of today, Anika Lopes and Ancestral Bridges and William Harris. Big round of applause. And the wonderful Amherst History Museum, our wonderful colleagues just up the street, who among many important objects are also the stewards of Emily Dickinson's one existing dress. Some of you may have seen that before. We're big fans of the Amherst History Museum. So today we are gathered here to share some information with you in celebration of this wonderful event. We're going to be hearing from 2 of our guides here at the Emily Dickinson Museum who have dove into the archives for today to do some research, to pull together some really great information about the Dickinsons, about their politics in the Civil War era, and about the Black men and women who worked here at the Emily Dickinson homestead for the family, or in the employ of the family in the 19th century. And following hearing from Melba and Chris, we will be hearing from William Harris, who will bring us home for our stop today, a descendant of Charles Thompson, who you're going to hear more about in just a moment. So without further ado, I think I'll be turning it over to our wonderful guide, Chris Faubert, who will be followed by Melba Jensen. Thank you so much, everyone.
It is amazing to see so many people as part of this. Thank you all for being here today. I'm honored to be here with you. Happy Juneteenth. This is such a crucial event to commemorate. And I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers beyond that. Something like this takes so much work, so thank you all for everyone who was involved in putting this together. So I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about the Dickinson family. As one of the largest landholding families in Hampshire County, the Dickinsons fell within the ranks of New England's provincial elite. Provincial by the standards of Boston's superior size and wealth, but elite within the context of a small agricultural town like Amherst. The Dickinsons often looked to black families like the Newports, the Thompsons, the Holdens, and Irish families like the Mars and the Kellys when seeking hired laborers. Beyond this, when we think a little bit more about that labor, it took on various different forms. It was domestic work. It was other types of work like short-term day laborers, and still others maintained the orchards, fed the livestock, and tended the farm that once stood on this property. Headed into the Civil War, Edward Dickinson's influence in the region as a lawyer, Amherst College's treasurer, and a property holder translated into stints in local and state politics at the very moment that slavery became the dominant issue in national life. Despite the fact that Amherst was rural and fairly isolated when compared to neighboring towns and cities like Northampton and Springfield, Edwards, one term in Congress, pulled the Dickinson patriarch into the sectional debates that threatened to pull the nation apart. Deeply conservative in his political beliefs, Edward embraced a specific reading of American history that viewed compromise as the essential component to the long-term preservation of the United States. It was such a philosophy that led him to oppose slavery's expansion while at the same time rejecting Thomas Wentworth Higginson and other abolitionists who called for the immediate rejection of slavery and the immediate destruction of slavery unqualified. Edward Dickinson and Thomas Wentworth Higginson remind us that a variety of opinions existed throughout New England when it came to the question of slavery. For a conservative New England landholder like Edward, secessionists and abolitionists embodied different brands of radicals whose demands threatened to snap the fragile bonds of union that held the nation together. But for abolitionists like Thomas Wentworth Higginson and others who were filtered throughout New England who were abolitionists, they arrived at the conclusion that if the government was truly derived from the will of the people, an American nation that restricted democracy to white men and enslaved millions of its residents had violated one of its most important founding principles, and of course, that was individual liberty. Indeed, it was these same beliefs that led Higginson to become one of the Secret Six who provided moral support and aid to John Brown as he planned his eventual failed raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia on the eve of the Civil War. And calling for men of goodwill to reach across the sectional divide and work together to avert civil war, Edward refused to cast his ballot for Abraham Lincoln in the 1860 presidential election. He chose instead to vote for a short-lived third party that echoed Dickinson's call for compromise. Even after Southerners fired on Fort Sumter and young men from Amherst marched off to war, Edward adamantly rejected any notion that the federal government could unilaterally abolish the institution of slavery. Taking to the pages of the Springfield Republican, the prominent newspaper in the region, he authored an editorial bitterly denouncing what he called, quote, the heretical dogma that immediate and universal emancipation of slaves should be proclaimed by the government, end quote. Given that the South rose up in a violent insurrection that sought to destroy the United States to protect the institution of slavery forever, many found Edwards' continued push for compromise wildly out of touch with the dangers of the moment and denounced the 58-year-old as a quote-unquote fossil politician. Edwards' conservatism is an illustration that race and class led Amherst residents to experience the war years in a variety of ways that in some cases intersected and in other ways were entirely unique. Some, like Fraser Stearns, who was the son of Amherst College president William Augustus Stearns, volunteered to serve early on. Others, like the Stearns' longtime black servant, Charles J. Thompson, remained on the home front, where they saw how deeply transformational the war could be for those who never saw active combat. When Fraser Stearns fell at the Battle of New Bern, North Carolina in late 1862, and his body returned to Amherst, it was Thompson who collected the remains at the Amherst train station. For Thompson, the reunion was likely deeply personal, as numerous accounts suggest that Fraser composed the love letters that the illiterate Charles sent to his wife Eliza when the two were courting one another in the 1850s. It is also likely that Thompson viewed Fraser's body because he advised the family to maintain a closed coffin, and he held a vigil with the body until its burial. According to Fraser's sister Abigail, Charles removed the fallen soldier's sword and provided it to one of Fraser's sisters, telling her to, quote, put it away and don't let your father see it. After William Augustus Stearns moved to the community to become Amherst College's president in the mid-1850s, Charles Thompson became a staple at the college as its caretaker and groundskeeper, in addition to working for the Stearns family. As college treasurer, Edward Dickinson would have likely been aware of Thompson because of the numerous duties he performed on campus. And in fact, we think he did know of Thompson through the college because Charles, his wife Eliza, and their adopted daughter Mary moonlighted at the Dickinsons to supplement the family's income by working at, for example, a tea ceremony that Edward held for Amherst College graduates on a yearly basis. Other black laborers filtered in and out of the Dickinson family's orbit during the war years. When Emily Dickinson's brother, Austin, and his wife, Susan, had their first child, Ned, in 1861, the two hired Abby Shaw as a nursemaid. Aunt Abby, as she was affectionately known, lived in the maid's room next to the nursery on the second floor of the Evergreens, which is the house you see next door to this one. She kept watch over Ned, especially at night when Austin and Susan were asleep in their first floor bedroom. And having lived as a slave in Georgia before acquiring her freedom, Shaw moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, where she was recommended to the Dickinsons by the editor of the Springfield Republican, Samuel Bowles, and his wife Mary, both of whom were friends of Austin and Sue Dickinson. Given that Charles and Eliza Thompson likely found employment at the Dickinsons because of Charles's connections at Amherst College, and since Austin and Sue hired Abby Shaw per the Bowles' recommendation, finding employment with one of the families that composed the town's provincial elite opened avenues that increased the likelihood of achieving some semblance of economic stability that likely wouldn't have otherwise been as easy. As the war years progressed, the frequency of casualties was not the only indication of the transformational nature of the Civil War. After President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, the entire nature of the war shifted to make the abolition of slavery its central objective. Previously barred from military service, black men could officially enlist in the military for the first time. 20 of Amherst black residents, including Christopher Thompson, his brothers John, James, and Henry, and Christopher's son Charles H. Thompson, a different Charles Thompson than the one I was just referring to at Amherst College, took up arms to liberate the millions of African Americans who remained enslaved in the South. Whereas Fraser Stearns, the Thompsons, and others willingly marched off to war, some were drafted. But a provision in the Conscription Act that instituted the Northern Draft allowed for a draftee to pay the steep fee of $300 for a substitute. That amounts to about $5,000 in current day money. The Dickinson's class status protected Emily Dickinson's brother, Austin, from potentially suffering the same fate as his good friend Fraser Stearns in marching off to war, because Austin paid for a substitute. The working class African American and Irish families whom the Dickinsons so often turned to when in need of labor weren't financially able to pursue a substitute and thus lacked the same options that were available to Austin and other white families who could pursue such a course. The complicated relationship between the Dickinsons and African Americans who lived in Amherst illustrates how the collision of class and race took on a variety of forms during a transformational period in this nation's history and in this town's history. Now I'd like to hand it over to my colleague and good friend, Melba Jensen, who will offer us some thoughts on how the Civil War influenced Emily Dickinson's poetry, how Thomas Wentworth Higginson played a direct role in her life, and ultimately how the Civil War continued to shape the lives of Amherst Black residents in very public ways as the nation transitioned from war to the uneasy process of Reconstruction. So Melba, if you please.
Thank you, Chris. In 1862, Emily Dickinson was having one of her most productive years. Thank you, Brooke. Okay. Little better?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. That year, we think she wrote over 295 poems. That's about 15% of her total known output. And in April of that year, she introduced herself to Thomas Wentworth Higginson by letter. She just read his article, Letter to a Young Contributor, in Atlantic Magazine, but Dickinson wanted more than advice. She sent Higginson 4 poems asking, "Are you too deeply occupied to say if my verse is alive? Please, sir, to tell me what is true." The conversation would continue for the rest of her life. Both Dickinson and Higginson were searching for the perfect cadence that would make natural description into poetry, but their motives differed. Dickinson treated her inner life as something to be explored and described. In the poems of 1862 and 1863, she grieved over deaths like Fraser Stearns in the Civil War that she could not see and did not completely understand. No Civil War military engagements took place in Massachusetts. Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to make sure we can all hear Melba's genius presentation.
Now I can roam. So Emily Dickinson's poems about the war are ambiguous. Sometimes we're not even sure that they are war poems. 3 weeks after the Battle of Antietam, Dickinson begins a poem. The name of it is Autumn. The hue of it is blood. An artery upon the hill, a vein along the road. But she never specifies whether the red that's flowing across the road and the hill in this poem are autumn leaves or soldiers' lives. The ambiguity seems deliberate. She leaves the choice to the reader. Other poems read as if she had witnessed a battle. "'Tis populous with bone and stain, and men too straight to stoop again, and piles of solid moan, and chips of blank in boyish eyes, and scraps of prayer, and death's surprise, stamped visible in stone." Could anyone declare victory in such a battle, Dickinson wondered? Did it belong to the winner, or the dead, who might have passed to heaven, or the survivors? But again, the poem gives no answer. Dickinson only asks the question. Higginson, in contrast, was not content with questions. He was an activist. He preferred answers, preferably answers that led to action. He had supported John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, as my colleague Chris mentioned, and when his 5 co-conspirators fled or hid, Higginson stayed in Massachusetts. I can't verify this story yet, but I've heard that he even gave a sermon in Worcester that Sunday where he said, "I'll be here every Sunday." He offered to testify against himself in front of Congress, and the Senate refused to hear him. Faced with a country that chose silence and violence over emancipation, Higginson turned to nature writing. April days, my outdoor study, snow, the procession of the flowers, these were the essays that captivated Dickinson, but Higginson was biding time, looking for a way to get back in the fight. 4 months after Dickinson's first letter, Higginson was offered a post of captain in the Massachusetts 51st Volunteer Infantry. He accepted and he reported for training, but in November of that year, he was offered command of the 1st South Carolina Volunteers. This was the first federally authorized regiment of formerly enslaved men, and Higginson knew that the success of this regiment would make emancipation more likely. By Thanksgiving Day, 1862, Higginson had joined them on an island off the coast of South Carolina. Dickinson seemed genuinely shocked when her letters found Higginson so far away. "I should have liked to see you before you became improbable," she wrote. The prospect of his death seemed like a face of steel that suddenly looked into ours with a metallic grin, the cordiality of death, who drills his welcome in. Higginson's military service may have pushed Emily Dickinson to confront the inevitability of emancipation. Her father, Edward, might resist it, the war could delay it, but would Higginson's soldiers ever lay down their arms without it? Can the lark resume the shell? Easier for the sky. Wouldn't bonds hurt more than yesterday? Wouldn't dungeons soar or grate on a man free just long enough to taste, then doomed new? She concluded the poem, "Take not my liberty away from me." Finally, this time, she had answered the question. By fall of 1863, Dickinson and Higginson were fighting simply to continue their work. Dickinson had developed an eye inflammation. The doctor forbade reading, writing, and direct sunlight. Higginson had been wounded by artillery and was probably recovering from peritonitis. Disability forced him to leave his command the following year in 1864. And knowing that he would be a civilian for the remainder of the war, Higginson returned to writing. By the war's end, he had published 6 articles documenting the achievements of the 1st South Carolina Volunteers and his wartime experience. White Northern readers tended to credit Generals Sherman and Grant for Union victories. But Higginson wanted history to recognize the soldiers of color. The fate of the Confederacy was decided by Sherman's march to the sea, Higginson wrote, but Sherman found the South, when he reached it, held almost exclusively by colored troops. Next to the merit of those who made the march was that of those who held open the door. That service will remain among the laurels of the black regiments. War-weary communities throughout the North erupted in explosive celebrations when Richmond, Virginia surrendered in April 1865. Members of the Amherst community and students at Amherst College demanded that they be allowed to fire the cannon donated to the college in memory of Fraser Stearns. Fraser's father and the college's president adamantly resisted. It's likely that Charles Thompson averted the potential crisis by driving a spike through the touch hole of the cannon, disabling it altogether. When it became clear the cannon could not be fired, the crowd dispersed. Thompson's essential role in the Stearns family was unmistakable. His quick thinking saved a distraught father from having to confront a patriotic mob determined to fire a cannon that represented his son's memory and possibly the conflict that could have ensued after that. The Dickinsons continued to hire Black and Irish laborers after the Civil War, but Charles and Eliza Thompson's latter years reflected the tenuous economic situation of Amherst's Black community. When Eliza fell into a state of cognitive decline, Charles found it increasingly difficult to both work and to nurse her. After William Stearns died in 1876, Thompson left Amherst College's employ. Stearns and Thompson's friendship had been the unequal relationship of patron and client, but it had offered Thompson some economic stability. Its loss, combined with Eliza's failing health and mounting debt, forced Charles to surrender the home the couple had acquired for working for families like the Dickinsons. Meanwhile, the Dickinsons continued to employ Thompson's son-in-law, William Henry Hawkins. As I look around 21st century Amherst, the Black Lives Matter signs and the town of Amherst's establishment of a reparations fund remind me that Juneteenth is about a broader and deeper legacy of racism. It was here. It didn't end when Union soldiers informed the last enslaved Texans of their freedom 157 years ago tomorrow. Emily Dickinson's demand to tell me what is true remains as urgent today as it was in 1862. Thank you for visiting the Emily Dickinson Museum. We're honored to have Mr. William Harris here. He will speak to you about the Thompsons and many others not yet named who lived in Amherst and shaped this world. Thank you for bringing their history to the homestead.
Thank you so much, Chris and Melba, for those incredible insights and perspective. And it's so rich to hear about history and understand the perspectives and dynamics, and it's not simple. It's always very complicated. I wanted to supplement some of the comments I made in the cemetery and just take it to a level that's a little more personal to my family. And we know that members of the 54th, 55th, and 5th Cavalry and other African-American units helped support Juneteenth in Texas, and Gordon Granger, who came to Galveston. Among those were residents of Amherst, my great-great-great-grandfather, Christopher Thompson, his son Charles, and his brother Henry. They were in Texas for 5 months, and in fact, Henry was assigned to Brazos Island on the coast of Mexico because there was fear at the close of the Civil War that a weakened United States could be prone to invasion by Mexico. 5 days before he was discharged, he contracted typhoid and died and was interred there. Both Charles and Christopher were actually assigned to Clarksville, and they were there guarding Confederate soldiers and informing African Americans that they were actually free. And they did serve through their service in October of 1865 and returned here to Amherst to live out the rest of their lives. And they're both interred here at West Cemetery, where we were a while ago. So it's always so interesting with history. As people become aware of things, new things are always emerging. And recently, a resident of Amherst, James Roche, was at a tag sale, and he saw a framed lyrics to a song from the Civil War era that he found really interesting and decided to purchase it. And he knew that sometimes people hid things inside the frames. And so he opened up the frame, and behind the song, there was a letter. And so he had read about the Thompson family and knew my cousin Debbie Bridges, who is here. And she works part-time at the senior center, and that's where he goes. And he said, "Are you a Thompson?" And she said, "Yes." He's like, "I found this letter." And it turns out it's a letter from Charles Thompson to his sister, Mary Etta Thompson, who is my great-great-grandmother. And so I'm going to read you the letter. And actually, the stop after this at the Amherst Historical Society, we actually have a facsimile of the letter there, so you can read it yourself. And we have a transcription, because it's written in kind of the script from the 1800s. It's a little bit hard to understand. And I may prevail upon the community here at the Dickinson House to help us, because there are 2 words that we can't figure out that are written in the letter. And some of this is colloquialisms as well. But the letter that Christopher wrote to his sister Mary reads, "This is my second letter from me to my dear sister, Mary Etta Thompson. This is my second letter from me. Did you get my likeness? Written from Camp Stoneham, November 27th, 1863. Dear sister, I now take my pen in hand to let you know how I'm getting along. I've got 1 letter from George, and he is not more than 30 miles from me, and he says that he will come and see me if he can get a pass long enough. And I don't wish that I could see you all once more and have a good time with joking again. But there is me use in talking, for it will do me no good. I cannot write very good, and cannot think of much to write. You must write of times to me, for it is lonesome here, and only it is a one thing that keeps me from deserting, that I want to get a good clip at one of those old success. Success is a colloquialism for successionists. We learned in doing this letter. And I then shall be ready to die, or go on with the army and do my duty as a soldier. Should do his duty, and I should get some praise for it. Write as soon as you can. No more for this time, yours with respect, from Charles Thompson. So there are all kinds of little nuggets that we're constantly assembling about the lives of people and experiences that they had in the past. And so I want to encourage you all to go to the Historical Society after this. We had mentioned earlier that Ancestral Bridges curated an exhibit, and in that exhibit we have images from the Civil War era up through the last early 1900s of African American families in Amherst, and this is actually the first time the Historical Society has exhibited both First People and African American imagery in an installation at the Historical Society. So we really encourage you all to see it. The other enticement for everyone is we will have beverages and light refreshments. So we encourage you to come and socialize and continue the conversation. So I want to thank you all for coming out today and express a special thanks to Brooke and Melba and Chris here at the incredible Dickinson House. We can't wait to see the facilities once they reopen. Thank you.
There's a line from a black musical from the 1940s, and it's a line that speaks true. You can imagine black people were not black people in the 1940s, they were colored people. And the line that I want to share with you, which goes along with what the black people were asking for, was a church to stay black. A black church built by black people in 1912 should continue to be our cultural center. The line from Pearly Victoria is, it's fun being colored – when there ain't no white people around to watch. What we noticed with some of the white people was that they thought we were a little too wild. They thought the music was a little too out there. We were beating 5 or 6 tambourines. We were stomping our feet. We were throwing our hands up in the air. We were doing what the Pentecostal church calls getting happy. It's when the spirit gets too much for the body to even process it. And suddenly, whoa, you're getting happy. They thought that that was uncivilized and began to correct us and to let us know that you should calm down a little bit more. And we would let them know this is how we worship. At some point, the board approached my dad, and they said, you have a choice to make. If you continue to let white people be welcome at Hope Church, a number of us will be leaving because it is becoming something different from, it's fun being black when there ain't no white people around to watch. We don't want people approaching us. What was going on with you when you were just doing like that? Did you have to do that? You know, they didn't want the questions. They didn't want the imposition of explaining who black people are when they are caught up in the spirit. So my father let the board know, all people will be welcome in Hope Community Church. my sanctuary, my sanctuary. Not bad. Good morning, or afternoon, everybody. I'm used to this being the morning time here at church. We haven't done this in quite some time. It's the first time we have been able to do something like this since pretty much before the pandemic. The last time, some of you have heard, some of you maybe came after, that the space was filled with any bodies in any kind of capacity outside of those who were cleaning and organizing, was at the celebration of life for our vision keeper and administrator, my mother, Rhonda, who's this lovely woman right over here. So thank you all for participating in our next life, our rebirth here in this community. As the pandemic continues, we will continue to figure out the best way for this sanctuary to come into use again. But thank you for being a part of the inaugural re-life of us, and so I appreciate you all for being here. The song Sanctuary talks about the building. The word church comes from a Greek word, which is the building, though there's another word coming from the Latin, which is about the assembly of people gathered together in the name of God. And so we have been able to, even without being able to be in the church building, maintain Hope Church. And there is a Zoom link that we have available every Sunday. We meet from about 10 to noon. And there's a way to sign up over here after we're concluded if you would like to be part of our email list or to check out our Zoom link. That is something that you can do. We would love to have more people see what we're about. And I'm going to do, we heard our pastor do a wonderful talk about the history of Hope Church since the Anderson family took over in 1970. I'm going to talk briefly about the prehistory that leads to Hope Church's inception here in Amherst. So I apologize for not knowing the name of the person, but there was once upon a time, believe it or not, a time when folks of color and folks of non-color could not worship together in the same way, and their first kind of steps to those forms of integration were separated churches. So in Amherst College, there was a church. I don't know if it's the building still stands, but there was a time when they would worship on Sundays and they would separate the white folks in the bottom, and in the balconies were the folks of color. And then there was a president of Amherst College in the mid-1800s, or around the 1850s, who decided that there should be a place of worship for folks of color. I will be honest, I do not know with what spirit this decision was made, because we maybe are aware that many spirits can come from that kind of decision. But I will say that I am grateful that someone took the step, because it eventually led to us being able to be here in this space. So the first name for this particular group was called Sabbath Church. And from the mid-1800s, the 1850s to 1869, they met at Amherst Academy, which is a school that the likes of Emily Dickinson went to. This building used to be on the parking lot right next to the, right across the street from the Jones Library. And it stood there until around that time or something, and that's where the church would meet on Sundays. And so they were called Sabbath Church. Eventually, after they were no longer in that building, they shifted their name. They became Zion Mission Chapel, and it was mostly a Sunday school. They did not have a formal place of congregation, so they were kind of still discovering to what extent they could be a church. I think they were no longer under the support of Amherst College, so I think this was their kind of stepping into their own, and so they became Zion Mission Chapel Sunday School, and they met different places on Amherst College campus for a period of time. Then in 1874, so that was about 5 years of that, in 1874, a group became Zion Methodist Chapel, so my presumption then is that they aligned themselves with the overall umbrella of the Methodist Church. And so they were able to do that, and they had a building which was called, I don't know, the building, I guess it was Zion Methodist Church. It was
on Northampton Road, so it's on Route 9, get my bearings, right over where the football field is for Amherst College. There used to be a small little chapel, maybe about half the size of this building. Now, all it was the room and the steeple. There was nothing else. And they were over there from 1874 until about 1907. Then there was a schism in terms of how they wanted to continue their worship, and that became the Zion Methodist Church stayed there, whereas the Union Methodist Society broke off, who would eventually become the AME Zion Church, which you will visit soon. And they were at the town hall for a little while, and I unfortunately don't know the rest of their specific history, so that'll be really interesting to know if anyone over there can speak to those years. But the Zion Methodist Church maintained at that building on Northampton Road, where the football field is now, until 1907, when they began building this building. So it took them from 1907 to June 1912. During that time, I believe they were primarily there, but members of that community would be here working on developing this land, building this sanctuary that we are in today. And again, it was completed in 1912. They moved over here and became Hope Society Congregation. That was their name, Hope Society Congregation. Eventually, they were active until the 1960s when the church closed down. They had, I will speak to this one brief thing that is relatively common in some of these areas. Yes, the church was known to be a church for African American folk. It was that was the point. However, the ministers were almost all, if not all, white professors who would come and be the ministers here. I think I maybe heard that there was one person of color who had leadership during that period of time before the 1960s, but I'm not clear. But I know that it was a lot of white folk who were the ministers of a church for African American individuals. So that particular practice was pretty commonplace. It closed in the 1960s, I don't know the exact date, and that is when the Anderson family, helmed by my grandfather, Laverne W. Anderson, my grandmother, Dr. Norma Jean Anderson, they came with the rest of the family, with Carlos, Chuck, Rhonda, and Crystal. They all came and as we had heard, developed this church. And at first while it was Hope Congregational Church, I believe, and then at some point the decision was made, and I believe that concurs with the opening of the community to Hope Community Church. And there was and is some unique differences in how that relates to how the congregation would interact with everybody. And then there's the beautiful history of all of the different pastors and leadership that have been here to this day. And that is the brief pre and current, up till now, history of Hope Community Church here on Gaylord Street. And 110 years of this building, but this history is so much deeper. And I'm so grateful for every single step of that way, because here we are.
A lot of people think, where do spirituals come from? They think spirituals emerged out of slavery. Okay, that's the mythology. But where did it really come from? Anybody have a guess?
Our church.
Where? Africa. Africa! They came from people who were doctors and lawyers and medicine men and mothers and grandmas and legal people who knew what to do and people who could speak various languages, a lot of language. All the people who already had skills and talents, and gardeners and people who knew how to help people give birth, and they had everything over there. So they grabbed all those people and brought them here. And guess what? Those folks, my ancestors, they brought all of what was in them from Mother Africa here. And that's where the spirituals came from. They came from that energy and that power. They knew whatever God they worshipped over there. It was, they could look up in the sky and see what they need to know. But the spirituals
were empowered not by slavery, but by their existence in their mother earth. Just like our indigenous here, they are empowered to take care of the earth. Okay, so we're going to sing a couple of African freedom songs in honor of our ancestors.
Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. 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 Justice is coming. Justice is coming. Justice is coming. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes,
What is our sin? You're saying our sin is that we're black?